Hi, everybody. Professor Sennett here. I hope you have had a good week. Thank you for your good work so far this semester. Please be sure that you have submitted everything you need to, particularly as it involves your informative speeches. So the next speech we're going to be talking about is a persuasive speech. But before we do that, and I think I'm going a little bit out of order in the syllabus, I want to talk about presentation aids. That could be a handout, slides, a demonstration. There's a whole list of things that you could do in terms of adding presentation aids to what it is that you're doing. Now, here's the thing about presentation aids. Presentation aids should enhance your presentation, not take away from it. It's very easy sometimes, particularly as the programming gets better, the technology gets better, the software gets better, to get all caught up in all the bells and whistles and all the cool stuff you can do. And if you, pursue a career in maybe working in communications or find yourself in an office or a business environment, I won't be surprised if the CEO all of a sudden comes steaming downstairs and says that he or she has to make a presentation and they want all this cool stuff on the PowerPoint. First thing about presentation aids is that you don't start with them. You start with your words. You start with your presentation. And then you figure out, okay, what else can I add to the presentation to make it better? In persuasive presentations, you're trying to persuade somebody to do something, to change their opinion. So any little thing you can do to maybe move them closer to what it is you want them to do is a good thing. Just want to give you two examples from my own experience. A couple of years ago, I was at a renewable energy conference in Nevada. The featured speaker was President Clinton. That was a big deal. It was President Clinton. He was talking about kind of a complicated topic, but when he came to the podium, he had a rock in his hand. That's all he had. That rock, combined with who he was, made the presentation fabulous. Now, on the other hand, I want to tell you about a professor I had in my freshman year at Boston University. Professor Murray Yeager. Never forgot his name. I had him for Intro to Communications, COM 101. Back then, the big lecture, 300 people in a room, the professor, down in front or up on the stage. So he had a challenge, no question that, Professor Yeager had a challenge in trying to engage most of the 300 of us for at least most of the time. Class was 9 to 11 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He was also a drama teacher. He was also into the theater. So Professor Yeager did have a flair for the dramatic. And his lectures, his presentations back then were really kind of ahead of their time. Video clips, sound clips, lights flashing, all kinds of things. It was really cool. And you know what? I remember nothing of what Professor Yeager talked to us about, except his name, and except that his presentations were really cool. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, of course, Professor, you don't remember. That was many, 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 many years ago. Well, that's true, but it also isn't true because I remember other professors that I had as an undergraduate. And I remember things that they taught me. I remember professors that I had as a graduate student. I remember what they taught me. One of the most effective graduate student professors I had at Providence College was named Mario D'Annunzio. And his classroom was a conference room. And we would sit around the conference table, and Professor D'Annunzio would come in, sit at the front of the conference table. Back then you could smoke. He'd light up his pipe, and he'd start telling us stories. And he had a whiteboard behind him, and maybe he had a slide or two, all that was necessary to make the point, because he had a great presentation. He knew what he was talking about. he told stories. And I can't say enough and enough and enough the importance of telling stories in your presentation. They're the most effective thing that you can use. So I have posted for you the slide presentation that I'll be using with my day students. I'm also going to ask you to take a look at, and it's only a portion of his presentation, the presentation that Steve Jobs made when he unveiled the iPhone. Now, the iPhone is something that you all grew up with, you all take for granted. Obviously not something that I grew up with. And what he talks about is really world-shattering. I mean, I think as we've talked about before, he changed the world in a black t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. But his presentation of such complicated and groundbreaking stuff is brilliant in its simplicity. And he does use presentation aids. And I hope you're going to notice how he uses them, because that's what I'm going to ask you in the discussion. The discussion this week will be about his presentation, how effective he was, and how effectively he used the presentation aids that he did. So I think I love this presentation. It's, again, one of my favorites that I'm happy to share with you. So check that out, participate in the discussion. Please look at the slides. There are some videos in there that I think you will find helpful as well. So next week, we'll start to get into the nuts and bolts of a persuasive presentation. But this week, I want you to think about, what can I do in addition to my words to make my presentation effective? Talk to you next week, and have a good week.